GOP Louisiana Senator John Kennedy met hate with hate. Sitting in on a Senate Judiciary hearing intended to examine hate crimes, Kennedy picked this setting to go after Executive Director of the Arab American Institute, Maya Berry, lobbing a series of attacks accusing her of supporting terrorism. Let's watch.
You support Hamas, do you not?
Senator, oddly enough, I'm going to say thank you for that question because it demonstrates the purpose of our hearing today in a very effective way.
Let's start first with a yes or no.
Hamas is a foreign terrorist organization that I do not support, but you asking the executive director of the Arab American Institute that question very much puts the focus on the issue of hate in our country.
Well, I got your answer, and I appreciate it. Let me ask you one more time. You support Hamas, don't you? You support UNRWA and Hamas, don't you?
Sir,
please.
I think it's exceptionally disappointing that you're looking at an Arab American witness before you and saying you support Hamas.
You know what's disappointing to me?
I do not support Hamas.
Bring yourself
I do not support Hamas.
You don't support UNRWA. You don't support Hamas. You don't.
I was very clear in my support for UNRWA.
Hezbollah, and you don't support Iran. You should hide your head in a bag.
Berry kept her composure through the skewering. Here to talk about this further is Maya herself. Welcome. Thanks for joining us, Maya. First, how are you doing? Because with something like that, as insane as it was to watch it, I'm sure experiencing it personally, and then what comes afterwards when something like this is played out in the press and on social media. Are you safe? Is everything okay? Your colleagues?
Yeah, I mean, regrettably, we've encountered hate previously and are familiar with what happens when elected officials, thought leaders, others take an approach that targets a community as opposed to having a reasonable policy disagreement. So we are taking the precautions that we always take, and we're blessed to have the most incredible staff always and wonderful people being supportive. But I do wish it hadn't happened, that's for sure.
Yeah, I guess I don't quite understand why that line of questioning, because you did, as far as I could see from watching the clip, you did pretty quickly give the straight-out answer that you do not support Hamas or Hezbollah, that he seemed to kind of ignore or not hear. You know, he was sort of accusing you of not answering a pretty direct question, but you did answer it and say that you don't support those organizations. So what was that like?
You know, unfortunately, even though the exchange with Senator Kennedy is the one that went viral, there were multiple times during the hearing where other members of Congress attempted to introduce a foreign policy conversation. And I attempted to explain that as much as folks love sound bites and gotcha moments, these were indeed complicated foreign policy discussions that did not belong in a hearing designed to address the increase in hate crime. And as much as I attempted to move it back to our conversation, that's when I got the pushback. And that really was quite extraordinary. I don't think, to be honest with you, I don't think those members were there to have the conversation about the topic of the hearing, but rather to subject an Arab American witnesses to this idea that we are more prone to support violence or to engage in a conversation about, again, complicated issues that don't belong as part of this conversation.
Well, and speaking of complicated, I mean, I think even the idea that the hate crimes situation is itself complicated. I remember reading reports about these statistics over the year. I'm sure you know as well as I do that it is a difficult thing to measure because reporting is not mandatory. You know, if we're talking about the FBI's data, which is compiled from local police departments that don't always report, and if they get better at reporting over time, it can look like hate crimes are increasing, but it could just be, well, they actually didn't send any data in the year before, and now they sent a little bit of data, and it looks like hate's gone up, 300%, but that's just like, the move from one reported crime to 4 or something like that. And it's not just on the Arab side, or, pro-Jewish organizations are also routinely making the claim that hate crimes against their communities are increasing. I tend to, not that I'm accusing you or your organization of this, I tend to worry sometimes that advocates on behalf of these issues are always trying to make the issue seem like it's getting worse because that's how you attract, attention as an activist organization when the statistics are very complicated.
So Two things I would say. The first is you've managed to add more substance to the conversation about the complexity of hate crime data collection and reporting than, frankly, the Republican side of the aisle did during the hearing.
Oh, thank you.
Two, I would point to the fact that hate crime data collection and reporting is indeed not mandatory, and that is what needs to happen. And while I appreciate the sort of nuance you're trying to introduce into the complexities of that, I would simply point to the fact that none of us, whether it's the Arab American side, American Jewish side, Asian Americans, Black Americans, no one wants to see an increase in these, but rather we are keenly aware that regrettably there has been a trajectory. We've seen a 99% increase since the 2015 and the onset of the 2016 presidential increase in hate crime. And what's more likely is not that those numbers aren't real, but rather that they are a minuscule of the actual number of hate crimes that occur in our country. So according to the Bureau of Justice statistics at the Department of Justice, we anticipate about 1% of hate crimes are actually reported. So when you're looking at 2023, the FBI just released their hate crime data on Monday, yesterday, and yet again, third year in a row where it's the highest number of incidents on record with 11,862 for 2023. And it's very challenging, I think, as we think about this, to think that that's perhaps just a minor fraction of the number of hate crimes that occur in our country.
Maya, I'm looking at your advisory on the FBI report, and anti-Jewish was 63%, anti-Muslim 49%, and anti-Arab 34%. And they go down through everything, whether it's your sexual identity to the community you come from. What I found really interesting, since they've been reporting since 1991, is that there was this chunk of time until 2015, they didn't even report on the Arab community. Why was this? What was going on behind their thinking then, and why the sudden adjustment?
That's an incredibly important question to us. When in 1991, where the Hate Crime Statistics Act was passed, and 1990 actually is when it was passed, and when the FBI began collecting the data, Code 31, which was the anti-Arab category, actually existed. And then something happened where there was guidance issued that a local agency, a municipality, should not report on that category. And it did indeed disappear. So imagining how you can attempt to address a problem if you don't have data on that problem. The category was not reintroduced until 2015, which is one of the reasons that as people look at the data, please understand that there are complexities. As your colleague was noting, there's a massive underreporting problem for certain communities tied to their relationship and trust in law enforcement. There's the fact that the category itself disappeared for decades and was reintroduced in 2015. So whether or not local municipalities are sufficiently trained on how to report anti-Arab hate is an issue. One of the brutal hate crimes in 2023, the murder of Wadia near Chicago in Illinois, that was reported as an anti-Muslim hate crime, but not also as an anti-Arab hate crime. And that goes to the importance of understanding the level of training that's required. Wadia was targeted indeed because of his and his mom's Muslim faith, but the alleged perpetrator also talking about wanting to kill Palestinians and Arabs. So it's important that we get that data part correctly. The other thing I would note, those percentages that you gave, I mean, a staggering 63% increase in anti-Jewish, the increase in anti-Muslim and anti-Arab as well, those are increases. So it's a 22 to 23 increase. And when we pulled our data for the hearing, we did the analysis on 27 states plus the District of Columbia in preparation for the hearing, because we take our job seriously, and the FBI data had not come out. We found that about half of both the anti-Jewish and anti-Arab hate crimes that had been reported on the state level occurred after October. So there is a thing called the backlash effect, and there is a real problem that we have to address with. I just don't think that happens when we introduce topics of foreign policy into a hearing on hate crime.
Well, but how would you respond to someone who says, well, look, these are hate crimes. For them to be hate crimes, they have to have an underlying criminal element, right? It's not, we don't just criminalize hating someone else. That's First Amendment protected activity. But if you beat someone up, and then you can be additionally charged if you're doing it for reasons of animus consistent with the hate crime laws. I think a lot of Americans would say, if somebody beats up their neighbor, beats them with a baseball bat or something, they should be prosecuted, they should go to jail, whatever the sentence is what that should be. And that should be regardless of whether they hate their neighbor because their neighbor is black or gay or just, knocked over their garbage cans or something, that what is the reason, the relevant thing? Don't we just want to punish and deter crime regardless of the motivation?
So, I mean, that's the underlying conversation with regards to hate crime laws from the beginning, which is that, and it's important, I really appreciate the way you framed it, right? A criminal offense has to take place first. So first you have a criminal offense, you have something that is illegal that takes place. The question of an additional charge of a hate crime comes into play, which is, why was that person targeted? So it's not what I did, because the criminal offense is there. It's why did I do it? And the key to understanding the issue of hate crimes, and why I think correctly our country has invested in a process of understanding them, is they victimize that individual, they victimize that family, but they also victimize that broader community. So the impact that it has is significantly larger than that one individual. And I think that's the reason we have taken it seriously, and that's the reason we've put efforts in place to attempt to address and reduce the number of hate crimes in our country.
Maya Berry, really appreciate you joining us. I've also testified on hate crimes and the trade-offs between that and free speech before Congress before, so I appreciate it can be difficult to have a very informed conversation with our elected representatives. But thank you for having one here. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Maya.